Both high carb and low carb, high fat are absolutely viable dietary approaches. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. Now, this is one of those topics that, as someone who's worked with both, had clients who do both, have known people who are in amazing shape with both, great health with both. Stuff I've observed over the years with this is that these are both extremely viable dietary approaches, right? And we need to be clear on that. It's just that people need to understand they work through a couple different pathways. And there's some things that they tend to have in common. And what I'm going to say with this is that the real keys to making either one of these truly work, and I mean good blood work, because again, people who do carnivore and stuff don't have good blood work. When I say good blood work, I mean your LDL is controlled, your fasting glucose is good, lipids are good, right? This sort of stuff. This is what we mean by nice, healthy, good blood work. So either one of these approaches tend to work really well as long as you keep saturated fat moderated and you keep refined sugars really, really low, and you keep fiber high. That's really the main key. And that's the thing I've noticed is that if you do those things, people tend to be lean and healthy no matter what. In fact, I would say those are the take-homes. And again, people who talk about, well, this blood work of mine got better on low carb even with high saturated fat. Like, yeah, but I promise you your LDL might have got really bad and stuff. So that's what we mean. Like, you want it all to be good. So when we look at these things, there's pros and cons to each. One of the things I'll say with the really low fat does tend to be good for satiation for a lot of people. People who do high carbs, low fat, and they keep the protein in that good range for muscle growth, around that 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. These are people who they don't gain much fat when they try to bulk. They tend to stay full, tend to stay lean. Tends to be really good for people who want to do very high volumes of training, people who want to do endurance sports. This stuff works phenomenally well. In fact, I would say for some of those, they actually probably, honestly, for endurance sports, they do better doing high carb and high fat, if we're going to be frank here. But I digress. Back over to the point. For people who are not doing that, this approach works, and it's well documented in all the scientific literature for longevity. Right? It's understood. Like, we see that when we look at things like Okinawa, a lot of Asian countries. So this is well known for longevity. Like, people tend to live long lives. They tend to do well on this sort of dietary approach, and they don't get fat. They don't have diabetes. They don't have these problems. But usually that's in the case of where if they're doing white rice, they do lots of vegetables with it. And if not, it's more whole grains, sweet potatoes. Eating in that manner is your staple foods, or, again, brown rice, beans. People who eat this way tend to do really well. The downside for some people, it can cause gastrointestinal distress. It can cause some bloating of the stomach. I would say for me, when I've run this approach, that's the biggest downside. I feel bloated all the time. I feel full. It's great for training. I can train amazingly well. It's great for body composition, but I tend to be bloated and hold a lot more water when I do that approach. But the workouts, I can handle a lot of volume. Workouts are good. Again, I feel like I gain muscle really, really easy when I do that approach, for me personally. And I know people who do well on that, cutting all the way down even to contest lean. Okay, it's an absolutely viable approach. But the take home there being, you're really talking about a brown rice, broccoli and chicken type diet. Or, even tofu or whatever. And it works for a lot of people. And I've run it for periods of time, really successfully eating that way. But again, it bloats the holy heck out of me. Other times, when I've messed with the lower carb approach, that's when I notice I tend to look leaner. And here's the thing I will say with the people I know who follow that approach. For people who do the lower carb, higher fat, and in fact, I have a client who eats this way, and it's solved a lot of his health problems. He's lost 200 pounds. His blood work is good, and he actually eats more red meat than I would normally advocate for people, but his LDL stays good. So I tell him, well, I mean, if your lipids look good, then I'm not as worried. But he does stick to really lean cuts of red meat. Okay, and he eats a lot of healthy fats, right? So again, he's really big on, say, avocados. All right, so the people who follow this approach tends to work really better for people who just want to look a little leaner all the time, less water weight. It tends to be easier on your gut because there's less total bloating, there's less soluble fiber from grains. And the thing to think about with this sort of dietary approach is that if it's extremely rich in plant-based, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated fats, right? So again, what are we talking about? Nuts, right? Walnuts, peanut butter, avocados, olive oil, olives, right? This stuff. When your diet is rich in that and you're keeping the saturated fats still pretty moderated, you see an improvement in insulin sensitivity just like on the other, but inflammation tends to be extremely well controlled. So again, a couple of take-homes for people who tend to follow this dietary approach: a little less bloating. You tend to look leaner, right? You hold less water. You may not have as much fullness in your muscles when you get real lean as the higher carb people, but you also look leaner, you look harder. Your waistline tends to be smaller. You don't tend to hold the water in the gut from the other stuff. But again, the other thing, inflammation tends to be very, very well controlled. And again, people tend to stick to leaner meats, and even if they do meats, it tends to be red meat. They don't do a lot of dairy fat. I find some people who do this get away with eggs pretty well. But the general focus is on, okay, we get some quality protein, but then they fill up on those fibrous, healthy plant fats. Like that's really the staple in a diet like this. So this sort of approach would probably still oftentimes have a little more animal calories than, say, the other approach. It tends to be well balanced, though, with all of the plant-rich, just healthy, inflammation-reducing and insulin sensitivity improving fats, So it works really well, and it's great for controlling inflammation. It's great for controlling bloat. So either one of these approaches work really well. And at the end of the day, because they're both tend to be high in protein, high in fiber, very satiating, great for insulin sensitivity. Either approach is great for insulin sensitivity. They tend to be good for body composition. Okay, both of these approaches work exceptionally well for that, even though in certain ways they seem like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, because on one of them you're eating a lot, mostly fat calories, the other it's mostly carbohydrate. But when you look at the nature of these sort of diets, as long as they're cleaner carbs, you think of it as the cleaner, healthier fats. We're keeping fiber high. We're keeping antioxidants high. The diet is rich in these things. Okay? When we see this, it tends to be very healthy and it works out just extremely well. And again, I've noticed people do very well on both of these approaches consistently over the years. Even though they seem like they're on opposite extremes, they're really not. It's just the one macro is different. But the diets themselves really have a lot of things in common. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.